All right, so get ready, because today we're diving into a story that's going to stay with you.
Oh, is it a creepy one?
Yeah, kinda. It's from a YouTube channel, EcoNightmares, and it's called The Trees Cried, A Town's Flood and Reckoning.
Ooh, okay, I'm intrigued. What's it about?
Basically, it's someone telling their story, their experience with deforestation in their town. But it's more than just environmental damage.
I see. What else is there?
It's about what happens when we ignore, like, nature's warnings,
Right.
the emotional impact of that, too.
Right. That makes sense. I've noticed in a lot of these stories, that's what really hits home, the human element.
Exactly. And the way this story starts, it just pulls you in right away.
And it does. How so?
Where you can almost feel the tension building. Like, it's not just a flood, it's this, like, reckoning.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the narrator talks about the excitement around development projects at first, like promise of progress and all that.
Sure, the classic story.
But then it shifts to these warnings from the town elders, almost like foreshadowing.
I see. So they knew something was off.
It seems that way, yeah. It's like those classic disaster movies where everyone's celebrating and oblivious to the impending doom.
Right, right. Except in this case, it's not a meteor or something like that. It's
the town's own actions.
wow.
They were so focused on roads and buildings that they just saw the forest as an obstacle.
Instead of like a vital part of the ecosystem?
Yeah. Like, did they really think they could control nature?
I think that's a question a lot of these stories raise, right? That human hubris. And that's where the whole idea of ecological grief comes in.
Oh, tell me about that.
It's not just the physical loss, the tree's gone, but that deeper loss of connection, a spiritual connection to nature.
That's interesting. So, like, the town elders, they understood that connection.
It seems like they did. They talk about trees as guardians, emphasizing their role in the ecosystem.
Like the soil, rain absorption, flood prevention.
Yeah, all the things that get overlooked when you're focused on development.
It's easy to dismiss those warnings as superstitions, especially when you're caught up in the idea of progress, right?
Totally. That conflict is really at the heart of this story. The allure of economic development versus the wisdom of those who understand nature.
And that balance, right?
Right.
It's not just good versus evil, progress versus nature. It's more complicated than that.
Exactly. It's about how those things interact, the consequences of our choices.
You can practically hear the trees screaming, "Don't do it," in this story.
Yeah, metaphorically, for sure. But even scientifically, there's truth to that.
Oh, how so?
Well, forests, they do so much for us. They're carbon sinks, they filter water, prevent erosion, all these vital functions.
It's like they're the guardians the elders were talking about.
Yeah, and when we mess with those systems, it's like pulling a thread on a tapestry.
A whole thing unravels.
Exactly. So they cut down the trees, and, well, let's just say the description of that night, the flood, it's terrifying.
Oh, no. It's that bad.
It's like something out of a horror movie. The sky cracking open, wind howling, rain coming down in sheets.
Pure chaos.
Yeah, nature unleashed. And the narrator, you can feel their fear, their realization that
They caused this.
yeah, they were complicit. They destroyed the very thing that could have protected them. It's a shift from just an environmental story to something much deeper.
Guilt, responsibility.
Exactly. The potential for destruction, but also maybe for redemption. But, the devastation isn't just abstract.
What do you mean?
It's not just about the environment. There's a human cost, too, like with Mrs. Thompson,
Oh, who is she?
an elderly widow. The narrator describes seeing her trapped in her flooded house. They try to save her, but the current's too strong.
Oh, that's awful.
It is. And the way they describe it, you feel the weight of that helplessness, that guilt.
Look at that.
It's a reminder that this stuff has real consequences. It impacts real people.
Shatters lives, causes trauma, loss.
Right. And it raises the question, how do we move beyond just reacting to these disasters and start preventing them? How do we shift our mindset?
From taking advantage to taking care.
Exactly. From exploitation to stewardship. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. They don't just give up.
They start rebuilding.
Yeah, but they rebuild differently this time with a new understanding, a respect for nature's power.
It's like a phoenix rising, right, from the ashes.
It is. The flood was like a wake-up call, a moment of reckoning for them all. It wasn't just about rebuilding a town. It was about rebuilding their relationship with the environment.
And planting trees became a symbol of that.
I think so. Not just a practical measure, but a way to atone for their mistakes.
Yeah.
And the narrator talks about this feeling of redemption. Like, by caring for these trees, they're healing the land and maybe themselves too.
There's a really powerful metaphor in there somewhere about how our actions can be destructive, but also restorative.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about ecological restoration, which is becoming so important in fighting climate change. It's not enough to just stop doing harm. We need to actively repair the damage.
So it's not just enough to, like, stop cutting down trees. We need to plant new ones, too.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're part of this intricate web of life, not separate from it. When we hurt the environment, we're hurting ourselves.
There's a line in this story that really stuck with me, where the narrator says something like, "The trees cried, the town suffered, and my soul was forever marked."
That's powerful.
It is. It's like this understanding that everything's connected.
That's the core of ecological thinking, right? Our actions have these ripple effects.
So the town rebuilds, plants trees, learns its lesson. But this is just one town, right? How do we take that awareness, that action, and make it global?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Something a lot of people are trying to figure out. But I think The Trees Cried offers some clues.
Like what? Give me some hope here.
Well, first, it shows the power of storytelling. This personal account, it really drives the message home. It's not just numbers and data, it's an experience that connects with us emotionally.
So we need more stories like this.
I think so. More voices sharing their experiences. It can change hearts and minds, create empathy, inspire action, help us see how our choices affect the planet.
The story also shows us that change can start locally, right?
Absolutely. They didn't wait for someone else to fix things. They took charge and found their own solutions.
So it's not about waiting for governments or big corporations to solve the climate crisis. It's about doing what we can ourselves, right here, right now. But what can we actually do? I mean, where do we even start?
It feels overwhelming, though, right? Like, what can one person actually do?
I get it. It's easy to feel that way. But think about those little things, the choices we make every day. Like, remember how the town focused on that connection with the forest? We can do that too, just by spending time in nature.
Just like going for a walk in the woods. That's a great start. But it's more than just observing. It's about really engaging with it, like they did by planting trees.
Oh, right. Like supporting those reforestation projects.
Exactly. Or planting trees in your own yard, or even just having houseplants. It all helps us remember how important nature is.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about people who live in cities, like surrounded by concrete, not so many trees?
Yeah, it's a little trickier, but you can still find nature in the city. Parks, community gardens, even just noticing the trees on the street.
I guess so.
And growing your own food, even if it's just some herbs on a windowsill, that can be a huge help. It's about shifting our perspective,
Yeah.
Not seeing nature as something separate from us, but recognizing that we're all part of it.
Like that web of life idea.
Exactly. And when we start thinking that way, it can change how we act. Like the town realizing their idea of progress had some pretty bad consequences.
Right, they didn't see it coming.
But we can learn from that. We can think critically about our own habits, like with consumption.
You mean like what we buy?
Yeah. Where does it come from? How is it made? What impact does it have? Supporting sustainable companies, buying recycled stuff, using less plastic.
Little things that add up.
Exactly. And then there's transportation, which is a big one. We can't all stop driving, but we can make different choices. Walking, biking, public transportation, carpooling, even just planning errands to use less gas.
So it's about like consuming less overall, being more thoughtful about our choices and how they impact the environment.
That's a big part of it. And it doesn't have to mean sacrificing things we enjoy. It's about finding a balance, a way to live more sustainably.
Right, because in the story, the town realized that their old way of life just wasn't working.
And they had to adapt. Another thing that stood out to me was the importance of listening to indigenous knowledge. Those voices often get ignored.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
But how can we do that, like practically?
Well, start by learning about the indigenous history of where you live. The local tribes, their practices, their stories, they often have a deep understanding of the land.
And if you can, actually connect with indigenous communities.
That's amazing. But approach those interactions with respect and an open mind, a willingness to learn. It's recognizing that we don't have all the answers. There's a lot of wisdom out there.
And that brings us back to storytelling, doesn't it? Like sharing stories like The Trees Cried.
Exactly. The more we share those stories, the more those voices are heard, the ones that have been silenced for too long.
Yeah, it feels like we've come full circle here. Started with this like really intense story about destruction, and now we're talking about solutions and hope.
I like that. It's like the story itself, right? From devastation to rebuilding. And that's what these deep dives are all about. Facing those hard truths, but also empowering ourselves to make a difference.
So as you wrap up, what's like the one big takeaway you hope listeners get from this, from The Trees Cried?
I think it's that we're not just watching this happen, you know? We're a part of it, all of us. And we can choose a different way, a path that leads to a better future for everyone, for the whole planet.
And that starts with, like, remembering our connection to nature, making good choices and taking action, even if it seems small.
Exactly. Because even just planting one little seed with the right intention can make a difference. It can grow into something really powerful.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into The Trees Cried. We hope it's giving you some things to think about and, more importantly, some things to do.
Yeah, get out there and make a difference.
And remember, there's a whole world of knowledge out there just waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to The Deep Dive for more conversations like this, and until then, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.